everyone, it's Jessie from b.a.r.e Flower Farm. If you're new to my channel, I am a first year cut flower farmer growing in zone 6B in New Jersey, and I make YouTube videos focusing on the business aspect of flower farming. So today I want to talk about closing the sale at a farmer's market. And what I mean by that is, what does that messaging look like for you to convince someone who might be borderline interested in your flowers and then getting them to actually be interested enough to purchase your flowers. So we're going to talk about what I bucket as 4 different types of customers. And for me, for the last 9 years, I have been working on my other side hustle, which is a e-commerce soap company. But before I only sold online for soap, we spent the first 3 years selling at markets. So I felt like through those 3 years, I really started fine-tuning my messaging and really condensing it to that elevator pitch that really started converting people. So I firmly believe that, flowers can sell on their own to a very specific type of customer who is looking for flowers. But I also believe that you, as a salesperson, when you're sitting there at your tent, you have such an opportunity to not only educate someone, but also get them to buy something if they were not intending on buying before. So let's dive into these 4 types of customers that I'm referring to. So there are customers who will come to your tent and they kind of just like do a beeline for you because they see that you have flowers, they love flowers, they buy flowers, they're interested in flowers. You do not need to do much to convince them to buy flowers because they were always going to buy flowers from you anyway. So, I give these people a 90 to 100% conversion probability. And just because they are going to buy flowers doesn't mean that you don't have an opportunity to still talk to them. Because remember, you're trying to nurture a customer, right? So you've got that type of customer, and I'll talk a little bit about what that messaging looks like for that customer when I see a customer like that. The second type of customer is someone who is interested but needs a little bit of convincing for you to close that sale. And the probability I give these types of customers is a 50 to 60% chance that they would buy your flowers if you didn't say anything. The third type of customer is someone who is coming to the market, who is going over to someone's house later, maybe as like a hostess gift. They're looking for flowers. And so I also give these people a 50 to 60% chance. And a lot of times price might actually impact their final decision. Then we've got the 4th type of customer, and this is the type of customer who we all know, they come to your tent, they just want to look, but they're really not in the mood to buy, or they're not interested in buying flowers. And so, I call these the not bought in customers. And for me, they're usually here for soaps or candles, or they've got a kid who's like, ooh, like all these pretty flowers, let's come look at it. They drag their parent over, and then, the mom's like rolling their eyes. The dad's like, what am I doing here? And, they're really not in the mood to buy it. So I give them a 10 to 20% probability of buying. For each of these 4 types of customers, there are commonalities in messaging that I might say to them, but there might also be differences. And, for you as someone who is selling at a farmer's market, or really at any type of place where you've got random people coming, one of the things that you need to start doing is observe to see what types of customers you have. And it's very likely you're going to have customers that fall into the 4 categories that I just talked about. So, for me, there are a couple of key messages that I focus on, and, it will depend on the customer in terms of what I say to them. So for me, one of them is about, hey, I locally grow these stems. I'm in this farmer's market that is about 18 minutes away from the house where I live, where I grow these flowers. So these are local, you're supporting the community, and all these flowers are 100% seasonal. The second message that I talk about is really linking to my why and why they should care about my why. So I happen to be at a farmer's market, which is relatively green, in the sense that farmer's market doesn't allow styrofoam. It really doesn't allow for plastic bags unless if you're a farmer, just because produce keeps better in plastic bags. But they're really trying to minimize waste, and I think it does attract a customer base that is a little bit more green minded. And I say this because I sell shampoo bars, and I typically have a hard time convincing people to use shampoo bars or getting people to recognize what a shampoo bar is. And a lot of people who come to my booth actually already know what a shampoo bar is and have already used it, right? So that kind of gives me an idea that they're a little bit more sustainably oriented. So I always tell them that my why for starting a flower farm is because I want to reduce the carbon footprint of these international flowers that come in. And that's the majority of flowers that we buy, whether or not it's from a grocery store or from a florist. And, besides minimizing the carbon footprint, the with them or the what's in it for me as the customer is these blooms have to get sprayed heavily by chemicals to meet strict USDA pest requirements, right? Like we don't want invasive pests coming in. So it makes sense that the government makes them spray. So if you're buying a bouquet here and there, it's fine. But if you're buying a bouquet weekly, you really don't want to be touching those stems. And that's exactly what I say to them. I say, you probably don't want to be handling that too much because it's a lot of chemicals. And, a lot of times that's a moment of realization for these people that, oh, I did not realize that, there was the spraying of it, right? Like maybe I didn't realize that there was a carbon footprint, but less of a direct impact on me versus knowing that I'm touching chemicals. So that usually gets people to think a little bit more about why they should be supporting local. So when I think about pairing these messages, I think about that first customer who loves flowers, who is going to buy anyway. I just reinforce that, hey, like these are locally grown. These are 100% seasonal, or these are all seasonal flowers. These are flowers that, you're probably not going to be able to find like at a florist who is importing from wholesaler, right? So, we'll typically talk a little bit more about just the difference between local versus not local, because I know that they're buying flowers already. And I'm trying to gauge, are you typically buying flowers at the grocery store? Are you like, you have a CSA somewhere else, right? Like to what level of knowledge of local flowers do you have? And I'll engage with them in that manner. But, a lot of times you don't need to engage them, right? It's just, I think there's a lot we can do as growers to educate, because what I've come to realize is that people who love flowers don't necessarily know how flowers are grown. In fact, some people might know the names of a couple of flowers, but they don't know that, hey, like, snapdragons, are typically cool flowers. Sunflowers are warmer type of flowers, right? Like they don't know that ranunculus come from corms, how long it takes for you to start pre-sprout them and baby them and nurture them to bloom, right? So they find that kind of stuff pretty fascinating. I also use that locally grown 100% seasonal blooms to that group of customers who are looking for a gift, because typically if you're gifting a bouquet as a hostess gift, like the hostess is gonna say like, oh, like these blooms are beautiful, and then you as a gifter can say, yeah, they were actually locally grown and everything that is in here is in season. So we're in June and this is what's in season in June. So that usually, hits home in terms of that messaging. And of course, you make sure you're talking about how to maximize the vase life with those people if they're, getting it as a gift. I mean, I tell that to everyone, but I really hammer it home if they're giving it as a gift. The message around my why and, why I'm growing local stems, trying to provide that local alternative instead of a national stem, as well as the chemicals. That message goes to the people who I think are interested and needs a bit of convincing for me to close that sale. And I'm going to give you an example of what that looks like a little bit after, and kind of like walk through or role play a conversation that just happened this past weekend. And then I also use that on that why, as well as the chemical one, on the people who are looking but are not at all interested. And, I'll say that for most of those folks, I can tell when they're not looking to buy and they don't want to engage. I'm not going to force them into a conversation. So it's really, if I see them kind of like hesitating and lingering, I'll start the conversation with them. And it might look something like, oh, like, are you looking at these flowers? Do you typically buy flowers? Right. And that's how I get the conversation started. So let's actually dive a bit more deep into what a conversation can look like. So in my day job, I used to work with salespeople, And so this concept of role playing is something that a lot of sales reps and salespeople will do. So my husband's a realtor, and he's in this client service industry. And when he first started, we would actually role play where he might be a prospective buyer, and I would be that prospect. I would be that prospective buyer, basically, having a conversation with him so he could practice what that message sounds like. So, it takes experience to be able to message efficiently and be able to talk to your customer in such a way that it's not taking 30 minutes for you to get a message across, right? That's what they call an elevator pitch, for you to be able to concisely get your message and objective across within, like 10 to 15 seconds. So that's what you ultimately want to be able to do. And, my elevator pitch is I make local, or these soaps are sustainably made. They are completely zero waste with plantable packaging, and my flowers are locally grown, not flown in like the majority of other flowers, and they are not sprayed with chemicals. Like straight to the point, exactly what I'm selling, even why I'm selling it, and then they can go from there and ask me some more questions. So one of the best lines that I like to use is, I see someone looking at my flowers, and I'll open with, are you a flower person? And I know it sounds like kind of like a grammatically incorrect question, but it always works. Like, are you a flower person? Do you really like flowers? Do you know much about flowers? And that is a really good way for me to gauge, where to go next, because I'll usually get the response, well, I really like flowers, but I don't know much about them, or I know nothing about flowers. And so then I'll say something like, this past weekend, I'll say, well, I'd love to tell you a little bit more about these flowers if you're interested. And they've never said no. So, this is, in the sales world, you're asking for permission for you to be able to spend a little bit more time to talk to them. And typically, if you phrase it in such a way like, would you like me to tell you a little bit more? Could I tell you a little bit more? They're usually not going to say no. And then by virtue of not saying no, they've given you permission to engage in a conversation. So it'll start off as, oh, are you a flower person? No, I don't really, well, I like flowers, but I don't really know too much about them. Oh, can I actually tell you a little bit more about these flowers? Sure. So we're in this strange time right now of June where we're done with cool flowers, which are like tulips, bulb, anything that grows from a bulb, and then the summer loving flowers like a sunflower, a zinnia. So in this in-between time, this is where we have a group of flowers that we start a little bit earlier on that can tolerate frost. So we've got snapdragons here, we've got nigella. The nigella are actually, the petals are falling off and they're turning into seed pods, and these seed pods will actually last quite a while. They make really great dried flowers. We've also got a little bit of stock here, which, put your nose to it, it smells really, really great. It's got this sweet clovey smell. We've got some sweet William, this is feverfew, and then we've got the last of the ranunculus that are blooming. And ranunculus are a specialty type of flower where they only really bloom between, like, we'll call it April to June right now, depending on where you're growing them. So it's super, super seasonal. And right then and there, if you get someone who is on, like, who's on the border of buying, like, you've pitched to them, one, these are seasonal, they're not going to get them anywhere else. Two, you've given them a little bit more information around just like what flowers they are, but also I always talk about how long it takes to grow certain things. So with the snapdragon, I'll add, I started these from seed back in January, February. So now they bloom, like, they start getting an idea of all the effort and time it takes for you to grow flowers. And I'll tell you, I don't think I've ever, in the past 3 markets, maybe there was one person out of like 10 who I could not convert into a sale. They'll typically be like, okay, I'll take one of those bouquets. And this past weekend, there was someone who took 2 bouquets, right? Because she was just like, oh, like, it's my one chance to get these types of blooms because the heat is coming, right? So it's a lot of times it's just making sure that that they feel like they're getting something a little bit more special than what they normally would get if they just went to the grocery store. So so that works as a really good, starting, like, opening line. The other thing that I really like to do is when you see someone who is standing there and just has like this paralysis around, like, they all look great, which one do I choose? I start actually picking up the bouquets and saying like, hey, like, are there certain types of flowers or colors that you love? Do you like scent? Right? So, assuming that your bouquets are not 100% equal to one another, there's probably characteristics of each that you can point out. So for example, I'll say, hey, this one has actually quite a bit of unopened lily stems. This will keep in the vase for a little bit longer. You're going to get to see them bloom over time. So, I expect this to last like a good 10 days, assuming that you're changing out the water, right? So I talk about maximizing their vase life. Usually, if you talk about getting at least 10 days of vase life out because you're confident that something is going to open gradually, that is a really, really good pitch. But I'll also say something like, hey, do you enjoy smelling your flowers? This bouquet has stock over here. It doesn't, like, I don't have stock in all the bouquets. So this one's going to be really fragrant when you put it in the room. This one also has a little bit of dill. So, when I make my bouquets, I'm a little bit more cognizant about being able to arrange the bouquets in such a way that I can actually point out specifics of one bouquet that is not transferable to the other. So that way, it's easy for me to kind of differentiate between bouquets if someone has a hard time picking out one. Now, I feel like my customers at this market are actually relatively educated in the sense that they don't want everything blown open. They are actually looking for some things that are closed. So I haven't had to educate them on that piece. But the piece that always gets to them is the fact that these local blooms are not sprayed, but the blooms that they get at the grocery store, at the florist, if they're international, they're sprayed. Like, that is always a moment, like a light bulb moment, that they're like, oh, like, I'm really convinced that I should buy your blooms if I'm looking for flowers. So I always close out with, do you know how to maximize your vase life? And believe it or not, everyone always says, no, tell me more. And so out of 10 people who I ask this question, I'm only going to get one person who, after I tell them to cut the stems at a 45-degree angle, change the water daily, right? Make sure that it's not in direct sunlight. Really only 1 out of 10 person is going to be like, oh yeah, like, I knew that. So most people do not realize these little basic facts that we take for granted. So just make sure that you are talking about that. So, this is just a bit around how I think about closing the sale. When you're sitting at a farmer's market and, you're having a conversation with someone, the first piece is always observe, right? Like, what does their intention look like? What does it look like that they would be interested in learning a little bit more about, and start from there. And just think about, have a couple of opener questions, right? Are you a flower type of person? Would you like me to explain a little bit more about the flowers that you're looking at? Another question that I actually always ask is, are you local to here? This could be an opener, or it could be as I am checking them out, right? Like, I'm putting in my my app, like whether it's SumUp or Square, what they're buying, and I'm swiping their credit card. I have like a good 10-15 seconds to still engage with them. And that question, are you local, helps me understand, are they going to come back again? Is this like a one-time type of sale, right? Because there were people who were visiting from Colorado who bought flowers from me. They were visiting family, right? So I'm able to then engage with them and say, hey, I'll be here every other weekend. I'm part of the A vendor list. So if you're looking for flowers, I'll be here every other Sunday, right? So when the sale has closed, it does not mean that you stop talking to them, right? And even just out of politeness, you don't stop talking to them, but there is always an opportunity to either educate further about the flowers or educate them about how to find you in the future. So sometimes we'll talk about, I'm also on Instagram. You can find me here for the soaps and for the flowers, whatever, right? So every moment that you have with the customer is technically a communication and selling opportunity. And that's, one of the major takeaways here, right? So always be observing how you can improve that communication and therefore how you can close that sale. So hopefully this is helpful. If you have any tips on how you close the sale and what types of messaging you use, please add that into the comments below. I love to hear from you. I will see you next time.